this important time in Álamos history. If you have a story, for the new people, if you have a story that you have heard from people that either work with you or your neighbors, there will be a chance for you to tell your story. Today, I'll tell my story of 6 days I was here, and I'll tell the story of the 6 days after the flood. By the way, this project started out as a personal record for sharing with our friends in Vancouver, sent money and good wishes to the people of Álamos. I had taken a lot of pictures and I put them together in a book. It's the book. Oops, I guess put it there. To share with these people that have so generously donated. So, and the book shows the resilience of the people of Álamos throughout the days. It didn't start out that way, but that's how it ended up. My hope is that the pictures today will provide a catalyst for stories and more photos if those of you that were here have them. So I was here. I had just arrived that day on but PK wasn't here. So it was just the cat and me in the house on Rosales. And it was a fine afternoon. And then in the evening, it turned towards rain. And then by late evening, there was pounding rain. And I'd never seen it like that. But I checked all the drains and everything was fine. So I went to bed. The next morning, without knowing anything about what was happening during that night, next morning I went out to go to the Tiangas Sunday, and I saw cars, abandoned cars on the street, and there was what you'd expect of rain having been left. The street was dirty, but it was these cars going every which way that alerted me to something being amiss. So I went back to the house and got my camera and headed down towards the Alameda. But I was drawn to the arroyo because I hear voices there, loud voices shouting. And this is what I saw. This is the crossing near what those of you who have been here a long time call Chuy Ricos, and the rest of us people call Real de Abarrotes de Real. So you can see on the left, there's a staircase going up. Well, the pedestrian bridge was washed out and the water was rushing by. But what I didn't know was the water had been much, much higher, like 5 or 6 feet. The bridge was gone and it was too deep to cross. But you can see that the people are standing and staring at the water. And they were shouting to each other across the water. Nobody could cross. And I learned that during the night, a wall of 5 or 6 feet of water rushed down here. And I heard people talking about cars, having seen cars in the arroyo. So the dotted lines there represent the water line, the mud line. Anyway, and it was obvious that there was a lot of mud and there was a lot of debris and even boulders. But what struck me was the looks on people's faces, that they were just stunned. They were they didn't know what to say, what to do. Now some people were active, already cleaning and moving things around, but a lot of people just walking aimlessly. Know what to do next. So this is the picture of what the Waikarinas Bridge, which we now call the Yellow Bridge, and it washed out during the night. It created the biggest force because boulders and cars and debris had stacked up there, and so the water was rushing down the arroyo, but it wasn't until this bridge broke that a lot of cars and debris, further debris came down. And of course that isolated the people in Whitehaven's. So we were building a place in Las Higueras at the time. And once I walked around the Alameda area, I wanted to get over there to see what was happening in that neighborhood. So I walked over to the other arroyo, Escondido, and couldn't cross where we lived, but I went to another crossing where there was a road and got across there. But then once I was on the other side, even though I knew this neighborhood, I was disoriented. I couldn't get my bearings because I was behind buildings. Thought I could be on a road. Of course, the road was filled with water. So I finally found somebody to direct me. There was a fellow there by the name of Raphael who helped me find my way, and he knew where I lived and pointed me in the right direction. So Las Higueras and El Chalatón were one of the areas that was really badly impacted. That's Raphael in the top right, of course. And then the bottom right is a picture of his house. And that was his business as well. And he lost that business completely. You can see how many rocks and the water had just swept through the house and taken everything with it. I realized that people had been up all night in this area and that all their belongings were out in the arroyo and then either washed away or in this case they stacked up. And so I could see that these people had no place to live. I couldn't imagine where they were going to go and how they were going to manage with this. So I went up to our house and there was no damage on a hill, but I heard that one of our workers had carried his mother up there to our house, which was partially covered. And family had spent the night there, but who knows what struggles other people had during that night. Thanks. So once I realized our place was okay, and I had my bearings, I started walking back to town. And I could see that you recognize this corner, it's Galeano and Darrow. And in this case, walls were down on both sides. This is the corner near the bank. And so the walls were down. Thanks. So in addition to walls being down, all the shops in the Alameda had been impacted. You could see that the inventory had swirled around and been trapped in there. And stores being impacted. There were cars just strewn everywhere. They were all over the place. Then I walked over towards the hacienda, and the bridge between two of their buildings was down. So with all that damage, it was very discouraging. In the meantime, the local equipment, the contractors in the city had all their equipment was working, and I think they must have started during the night, pulling cars out of the arroyo, getting traffic flowing. So people were working already. So at the end of that day, I went home and kind of took stock and made notes of what we knew. I had learned that Norbert had brought rain and landslides, and that the rain, it was only a hurricane only. It was only a category 2, but it was the rain stalling over Mount Álamos that created the landslides. So the rain stayed there, the ground was already saturated. And so then the rain came down and brought all the debris and the boulders, everything into the city. We learned that the road was out, which is why everything, there were planes and helicopters all day long coming and going. We knew that there was a state of emergency that had been declared 3 days previous, and that Alamos was on alert, but we weren't expecting the landfall here, so people weren't really either prepared or super worried. We knew that there were hundreds of people out of their homes and that people were frantically looking for the missing. All town services were out. Power, we knew that the power was out, sewage. There was no drinking water to be had unless you had a private stock. The mayor at the time, Ruth Acuna, had ordered evacuations of certain areas, and because there were bridges still coming down, and there was a head count taken, and by noon, Governor Boers was in town and was taking stock of what was happening. So people knew, of course, including the mayor, that food was an immediate concern. So in the barrios, people were helping each other where they could. But keep in mind that people couldn't cross the arroyos to get anywhere. But we knew that DEEF, Family Services, had been well prepared and had worked through the night to have food available for people first thing in the morning. And of course, you know that the first one to be there of people that we know anyway would be Linda Adams there at 4 o'clock in the morning. And the story goes that she opened hundreds of cans, sliced hundreds of onions, scrambled hundreds of eggs, to help feed hundreds of people over the days that followed the hurricane. Her charming blog, Good to Go to Mexico, tells her story with her usual wit and flair. Las Delicias. Stephanie Meyer lives across from the cemetery, and she had heard the wall come down behind her, or had forced the wall down because there was an arroyo on the other side of the wall, and she was aware that people needed a place to stay, so they stayed in her at her place. And then first thing in the morning, she walked to Choco, and they told her to take whatever food she could carry. So she went back and worked with the posters to set up a shelter and a kitchen there at Las Delicias, that big property across from the cemetery. So they had 43 families at Las Delicias. They brought in a stove and equipment to cook. Women took turns cooking. The health department assigned them a doctor and a nurse for the first 5 days, and then a psychologist arrived. So this was a huge operation. Hotel Colonial and the Puerto Inn both set up kitchens in their hotels. Gary Arnold tells the story of going to DEEF first at about 7 in the morning, and of course seeing Linda Adams there. And the people at DEEF asked Terry to set up a food kitchen at her place. And someone had organized it so that they told her at 7 o'clock in the morning, you can't believe it, she would feed it, and they asked if she could feed 80 families twice a day for as long as it took. And of course she said yes. And so she went back to the hotel and rounded up her. They started preparing food to be driven out to different neighborhoods. She was assigned a district. Hotel Hacienda de los Santos, Jim Swickard was in Tucson at the time, and he got a call very early in the morning, telling him about the death and destruction. And by 7 o'clock, he had gone to Sam's Club and purchased 700 pounds of rice and beans for his flight to Álamos. So he arrived with all these supplies, and even though their commercial food kitchen had been damaged, flooded, they were still able to deliver meals for those who had lost their home. Ultimately, by using their 6x6 truck, they delivered 4,000 complete meals. So in this slide, Calle Morelos, which is on one side of on the north side of the Alameda, this is the residential end of it, was really, really badly hit. And I walked down that street early in the morning and realized the houses were empty, the doors were open, all the furniture was in the street. And I realized that, of course, those people had been taken in by friends and relatives elsewhere. So on day 2, President Luis Acuña and local officials and Eduardo toured the town. I heard Governor Boer talking to Carol McGillis. Some of you will remember her. She was our immediate neighbor on Dallas. She was pleading for electricity because she needed power for her oxygen. People were still searching for the missing, caring for victims. Local roads were washed out, so it's very difficult to get around town. Still no water or power, and clean water was a big issue. On the left is a picture of a garbage truck. Apparently, Álamos had 6 garbage trucks at the time, and they were all lost. But they were ultimately replaced by international donations. I was happy to see the logos on the new garbage trucks when they arrived somewhat later. And they all had a country name on them. Happy to see the on the garbage trucks. The picture on the right shows some of the water being pumped out in on Morelos so that they could get to the electric. The electric had just recently been undergrounded. And so once they got it dried out, then they could get the power on. 30% of the sewage system was demolished. I stood across the street from this woman who was in her doorway, and she was looking at the muck that had been pulled out of her house, and I was wondering what she was thinking. This is her second day of this, and then looking at the picture on the right, maybe she went to look down the street to see that some of those things in the street were hers. That could be her mattress. Thanks. People dug out the mud, they piled their belongings in the street. They set things to. Wait a minute. In the picture on the left, maybe you can see the mud line there. So after the Paiparinhas Bridge came down, there was this great rush of water, and it went up, in many cases, 5 or 6 feet. And then it receded fairly quickly after that. But this is shows you what one house looked like. So people were cleaning. They spread their things out in the sun to dry, and they separated the garbage from what they could salvage. And they did this day after day after day. By the end of day 2, we knew that the road from Navajo had reopened, and that allowed emergency vehicles and supplies to come in. Kitchens could get better supplies and fresh food from Navajo. The death toll at this point varied because there were different counts, and some of the deceased were not from Álamos. They weren't included. There were doubles and wheelbarrows were donated by the groups, and these allowed people to remove mud more easily, all thanks to the road being open from Navajo. The debris and the muck from the buildings was being transported to the edge of town temporarily. So there were, whatever vehicles were available were taking the muck to the edge of town. On a personal note, on day three of our 4 workers showed up for work today. We sent them home with tools and blankets they would be rebuilding for months to come. In this picture, you can see the water storage containers stored in the Palacio, which instantly became the warehouse for the supplies. People went there to get what they needed. Next. The 8,000 vaccinations were given. And the Red Cross was instrumental in supplying people with essentials. We escaped the 40-day quarantine that neighboring towns had been under. So there was no quarantine here. You have to appreciate the coordinated efforts of the federal government, the state government, the municipal government in taking care of the health and safety issues. DEEF, which was well prepared in advance, provided immediate distribution of food and survival supplies. Hacienda de los Santos had set up a food kitchen. We talked about that. And they arranged for 36 planes to fly in from the US to deliver donated goods. Sister City in Scottsdale pledged delivery of clothing, diapers, utensils, and wheelchairs. Las Comadres dedicated its efforts to providing bedding and beds. One comadre bought a bed in honor of each of her grandchildren who had clean, sturdy beds to sleep in. Amigos de Educación provided needed school uniforms and backpacks with school supplies. Dan Veenstra created the Hurricane Interactive program and collected money to distribute to people. More about that later. Private donations from businesses who had contacted their mailing lists arrived in large amounts. Relief arrived in all sorts of forms. In the bottom left, people registered to get paid to work, to clean their own homes. They were paid for a week's work. And top right, there's a picture showing where the military was distributing bottled water. So this is day 3, the bottled water was getting distributed. In the bottom right, liquor sales had been suspended, but Tecate trucks were transporting families and supplies around the town. So by the end of day 3, we knew that 70% of the electric had been restored, but there were still, hundreds without power. Housing was an issue, but it appeared that most people were taken care of by family and friends or neighbors. The hospital was in full operation, and staff had been brought in from other towns to help out. And the mobile health units took pressure off of the hospital. Crews from neighboring towns helped clean. So of course, everybody that was impacted was working on their own home, but there were still city crews available and crews from other towns that helped out. The food kitchens, all 6 of them, were at full capacity, and there may have been others that I don't know about. People were encouraged to get vaccinated, and the wells were not functioning because of the mud in them, and large amounts of water were being used for cleaning. So the people could maybe get the muck out of their house, but they didn't have immediate access to water for cleaning. This is a sweet picture by a little girl called Clarissa Junway, who drew this picture and called it "What I Gained and What I Lost When the Arroyo Ran During the Hurricane." Clarissa lived on a small arroyo behind Las Delicias, so she would have been part of that Costa Stephanie Meyer's shelter. And
she lost her dog.
She lost her dog. I've got that picture framed, and Stephanie and I are going to find her this week, and hopefully by next week we'll have more news of her now that she's 23. And of course you have to wonder what else happened to that family. You might remember Elena Chavarria. She worked with Clarissa to help her process what was happening, and presumably there were other children as well. Next, I kept hearing the word cochinera and learned that it meant pigsty, or maybe what a blinking mess. People worked nonstop to rid themselves of mud so that they could clean. And in the picture on the left, top left, the lime was spread to kill the bacteria. The city declared that all goods made of wood needed to be discarded. Cleanup crews from other towns arrived to work, and as well the Mexican Army, the Navy, and the Marines supported the cleanup efforts. Machines worked on the streets and in private yards. In the picture on the right, there's one of the, I don't know what that is, a front loader or a bulldozer cat or something. They went into private yards and cleaned up the amounts of muck and debris. Next. On day 4, the Hacienda de los Santos issued a report from Navajo arrived with truckloads of food. So people like Jim Swickard, like the people in business, called in all their friends, and help arrived from all directions. By then, most town services had been restored and food kitchens continued operating. Next. Presidente Ruta Cunha and Governor Eduardo Boers held a series of public meetings. In the picture on the right, Ruta Cunha is the woman in the white shirt, and to her left is Eduardo Boers. They're on stage there before they present. Governor Boers was born in Álamos, and he flew in on day 1, as we said, and frequently thereafter. He saw, when he first saw the devastation, he ordered bulldozers, loaders, and backhoes for the town. He often arrived with equipment and teams of workers. Next. Presidente Felipe Calderón visited, and Colonia Norbert was created. After Calderón visited, an area was set aside for a new neighborhood. He focused on the most vulnerable living near the arroyos and determined that they would be given some land and a starter room if they would move away from the arroyo. Today, Colonia Norbert, an area out beyond the airport, is an established neighborhood with a school, stores, homes with fences, and lush gardens. Some of the lots still have the single original room, but many places have been built on and have substantial homes. It's my understanding that it's quite a success. Next. Dan Veenstra, an American who lived here in 2008, collected money so that some people received the equivalent of $50 US. Here, top left, is Rafael Francisco Valdez in his home. You can see the mud line there. And he's with the late Dan Hoekstra, one of the volunteers who distributed and accounted for the money. In these pictures, each volunteer has a clipboard with the name of the person that they're donating the money to and the number. So there was excellent accounting for that project. I consider that one of the kind of quiet, people didn't talk about that program much, but maybe you were one of the volunteers, or maybe you donated money to that program. It certainly made a difference. Next. On day 4, 36 private jets flew in. The federal government had given them permission for the local airport to operate as an international airport. Jim Swickard worked with the Baja Bush pilots to fly in with donations. And if you were here, you'll recall, or maybe just picture the floor of a hangar with piles of polo shirts and shoes and diapers and women's clothing and all sorts of things. The 36 planes, that's a lot of supplies that came in. And there was a steady stream of volunteers that sorted and bagged things, and we took them out to the neighborhoods. People had drawn up lists of where we were to go, and we dropped them off. Jim Swickard used his 6x6 Pinzgauer, which allowed his team to go up and down the flooded tributaries where residents had no way to leave their properties. So some of them were trapped in isolated areas. And a 4x4, Jim says that a 4x4 wouldn't have been able to make it. So he used that same truck to deliver food food from his food kitchen, and then to deliver goods that were brought in by plane on day 4. And they delivered as far south as the border of Sinaloa. Today there was a change in town. I don't think it was just me. I think it was noticeable that there was less panic and less frantic work, that people had settled into a rhythm of, this is how it is and we're taking care of it. I saw determination as a homeowner continued to remove the muck from his home, just working slowly and steadily in a steady rhythm. He had no intention of stopping. I heard excitement in one barrio when the power went off. I saw the pride of a shop owner as he stood in his empty, clean, and repainted shop. It was ready for shelving, and he was ready to be open for business. I saw clear-eyed tenacity and initiative when talking to Enrique, the auto body worker, who stood in front of his shop with a list of all the tools and equipment that he had lost. He was asking if I could help. I could donate for a wrench or a compressor. He was super organized. I was really delighted to be able to help. He wasn't moping around. He wasn't waiting for help. He took the initiative to raise funds for his business. On appreciation, I talked to 2 women sitting on a sidewalk while they looked at dried, wrinkled photos, appreciative that their photos had been saved. On day 6, Ruth Acuna held a public meeting for the foreign population, where she outlined her priorities, which included health, security, and getting the businesses up and running. She led the municipal efforts throughout the months, and she paints a vivid picture of the events of the first night in her account, The Tragic Night of Hurricane Norbert, in her magazine Raíces, available at Kathy's Corner. When her article came out, it was February 2022, and it was just in Spanish at that time. But since then, she's put out this is a more recent copy of the magazine, and this one is in English only, I believe. But you can get it at Kathy's Corner, and I hope you have a chance to read her article and read more about the region. Next, in the days and weeks and months that followed, the market reopened. It was a week later. It had been pressure washed and sanitized and painted. Stoves and fridges and beds were given to affected families. Some businesses reopened soon after, others failed. The sewage system was almost complete 6 months later. Aid continued to come in many forms from many places. Work continued for months to rebuild the bridges and to protect the sides of the arroyos. You can see the gabions that are along the sides of the arroyos now. And Colonial Norbert, the streets and lots were laid out and given, the streets were given names of flowers or plants. The electric was undergrounded, concrete pads were poured, and homes went up. Next, let me read you what Stephanie Meyer wrote. She and the Costa family had set up the shelter at Las Delicias. 4 weeks to the day after Norbert, we had a big feast here for the families. They raffled off all the extra food and money and many good kitchen items, including the stoves we had been given. The Acosta family had power washed all the affected houses with chlorine, and people were back in their homes. Every home received a new box of dishes and utensils. Next. And we'll finish with this from Linda Adams. Tonight, we heard a lot of pretty Mexican music, and it was the first night since last Saturday night before Norbert hit. I haven't lived here long, but it seems everyone here has a spirit. I saw it today in the eyes of an old señora who looked frozen, leaning on her cane, staring at the rushing arroyo. But suddenly she looked at me and smiled and said, "Ah, Dios." I will tell you this, the Mexicans in this town are not somber. They are smiling. They are playing with their babies. They are helping one another. And they believe in their town. Thank you. Barbara, can you tell us about next week?
Sure, but also want to see if you have some quick questions.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I was not here in 2008. I came before and I came after, but I missed it. So your book that I first got a chance to read a few years ago really brought it to life. And for me, what is amazing is that in 5 days, we went from tragedy, disaster, horrible problems, to the point where we are seeing people back in their homes. Things have happened. Things have happened even from that tragedy. Perhaps things that are good for the city. Perhaps the sewer system we have now is better. Perhaps the installations along the wash. There's lots of things that have happened. And thank you for sharing those 5 days in your pictures. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Donna, so much. Next week, we're not going to let Norbert go. One more week, we're gonna go and have another presentation, and you'll probably find the chairs in this room a little bit reorganized. Because what we'd like to do are hear some stories. Hear some stories from people who went through it, stories from people who were gringos or North Americans or expatriates or Canadians even. Here's some stories from people who are alamenses, people who have lived here all their life. I see Memo in the audience, and Memo is going to share some stories with us. And we have with us, I hope, Lorna is going to be there. Who knows? There's Lorna. They have got stories behind the stories and behind those stories. And so I hope we can sit and talk to each other and look to each other in our faces and share those stories. And then we want to tell you, but I'll leave that for next week because I can't tell you all today. We've got plans at the History Association to carry Norbert forward, to bring it into the arena of some actions that we might take, some exhibits we might have, some plaques we might develop, some things we might do. So I'm not giving more of that away, but we'll do that next week. So please come again, Linda.
I won't be here next week, so I was here and I live on.
Can you stand up and?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
We did not leave the room, so what struck me when it was over, when the rain stopped, how quiet there was this stillness in town that was eerily, I mean, it was really something different that I have never felt before or since, as a matter of fact. And the only light, and I told this yesterday, the only light in the whole town was blinking on that tower that they're trying to hide on. And that light, I guess, doesn't work on electricity or something, so it was flashing. And the other thing that really hit me was, well, for one, the bridge here in the Hacienda, and Jim wasn't here, everybody could cross the Arroyo on that bridge. Because I think Ramon was here and called his father-in-law and said, we gotta do this. People are knocking on the doors to try to get across the Arroyo. So,
there are two labels, the interior bridge, so they're all,
the interior
town got across with the Hacienda to go to that interior
It
bridge.
was the interior. And the other thing that really struck me, because we live up on a hill, so our house wasn't damaged, but we couldn't cross the Arroyo. And everyone was walking through other people's patios and yards and everything. I mean, everyone was trying to help each other. There was this feeling of camaraderie, right? And so people could go downtown and see what was happening. I mean, you couldn't do anything.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes.
And another thing, on the mountains, there are highways clear. You go up there, you see these, like a paved highway up there where all these trees were walking around, and that's the problem, and that's the cut of the car. Like, starving, and there's still some, and I'm wondering if it'll show up next week in some of the photos.
They're still there.
That's another problem with it.
Yeah, there's still a big street.
Yes, Pam.
I was wondering,
Can you stand up a bit?
what are the death numbers that you have? You said that people who are outside Álamos were not necessarily included, but what numbers of the dead as a result of the attack?
I don't have a confirmed number, and I don't, if somebody told me a confirmed number, I wouldn't believe it.
Probably.
They ranged from 1 to 5.
Yeah.
But Jim Swickard has a story that hopefully he'll be able to tell next week about a family of 5 in one spot that were dead. So I don't think we'll ever know. That's my opinion.
Yeah, one thing, I think the official total was 4.
Yes.
However, unofficially, people believe as many as 20. But again, we don't know for sure.
Another question I had, can you tell us what your project is now, the new book for
Well,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
yes, that's the answer. Thank you. some of you will know Patricia Hamilton, and she has published a number of books that, from Alamos authors, and she has agreed to do for free all the, publication and getting it printed and getting it on Amazon. So it's not going to be money out of anybody's pocket, but it will be printed and available, assuming that there are enough photos and stories to go into it. And I think that's the important thing. And one thing that we will talk about next week is that there is a form that we have that works very well, where you'll be able to upload your photos, upload your stories. So in this week that's coming, and you're talking to the server in the restaurant and asking them if they were here during Norbert, and of course, they'll tell you a story. Anybody over 20 years old will have a story for you. If you hear a story that could be shared and could be part of a book, that's one place that you'll be able to share it. So we'll get that form out to you next week.
Right, it's called a Jotform, JOTFORM.com. And it is something that people use to do this kind of research. And one of the things that this project, Norbert, and why it fits in so well with the goals of the History Association, is that it actually is attempting to gather further data, further information, further pictures, further things that can contribute to an archive that will inform people in the future. You know, when that hurricane hit in 1850 or whatever, 100 years ago, it hadn't happened said. And so whatever was learned from then, apparently we didn't remember, or whatever happened. But this time we're going to get all these things in. And I do think there is a proactive interest now in understanding how these disasters happen, why they happen, and what can come out of them. And by the way, isn't Alamos an amazingly resilient pueblo? It's not just a pueblo mágico, it's a pueblo, whatever the word for resilient is in Spanish. It's wonderful. And you know what? That's what we want to focus on. We're going to focus on that Alamos strong, Alamos resilient, the people overcoming those obstacles and overcoming it in record times. I look back at some of the other disasters that have hit here around the same time in San Carlos and various other things, and it took quite a while. We actually were in wonderful position to recuperate in a way, partly because they had held, remind me, Catherine, council here of mayors from other cities, not too long before this happened. So everybody had been here, they had been celebrating all this, they had seen the estudiantinas, they had eaten our wonderful food, and then this happened. So everybody had Alamos on their mind, and they were ready to jump in and help. So preparation, resilience, remembrance, understanding. Yeah. Wonderful. And I can't wait to hear your stories. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for sharing these things. We're going to have some books next time for you to peruse.